They call me the teacher of righteousness. I am an Israelite priest of Zadokite lineage. I am the leader of a movement. Some have called us a breakaway sect, whom they call the Essenes, though some would call us by another name, the Enochians. When our people returned to Jerusalem from a long exile in faraway Babylon, we did indeed break away from a corrupt rebuilt temple, established not by our God, but under the suzerainty of a foreign Persian emperor. Eventually, we not so politely withdrew from the entire people to create an alternate society on the shores of the Dead Sea, eagerly awaiting divine rescue by a new anointed monarch from the line of King David, the promised Messiah of Israel. That's a story that must wait for later. First, we need to talk about the birth of our party, who we Essenes really are and how we came to be.
It was the 5th century before the Common Era, and the unthinkable had happened. The Israelites, having been defeated and very nearly made extinct by the neo-Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar, had come back to their ancient homeland and rebuilt their destroyed temple. Their thankfulness and joy are expressed in one of the most powerful poetic compositions of antiquity, Psalm 126.
A Song of Ascents. When the Lord restores the fortunes of Zion, we see it as in a dream. Our mouths shall be filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. Then shall they say among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord will do great things for us, and we shall rejoice.
But no psalm, however lofty, could obscure the fact that we were far from a proverbially happy family. It was the ruling class Israelites, led by priests known as Zadokites, who had been deported, and it was they who returned from exile to rebuild our temple. I too am a Zadokite, of the family of the high priest Zadok, who served in the days of King David and King Solomon. And yet I later threw in with an opposition priestly group, who had remained in the land while the upper class were in exile. Its members were scattered among the so-called Levites and came to be called the Essenes. Others came to refer to us as Enochians, due to our obsession with our ancient biblical patriarch Enoch. Like the Zadokites, we took inspiration from the great prophet Ezekiel and his vision of a heavenly temple. It was Ezekiel's vision that essentially disassociated the heavenly temple from the earthly one. As far as we Essenes were concerned, the heavenly temple alone was pure, the earthly one was defiled. After all, it had been built under the auspices of foreign, pagan rulers, the Persians, who replaced and supplanted the Babylonian Empire. We Essenes waited for the end of days, when God through supernatural agency will restore our people's independence and bring about a truly holy sanctuary. As a Zadokite myself, why would I have joined the Essene movement? That is a question I will have to answer after providing a bit more context for those tumultuous times and the internecine warfare taking place among competing priestly houses.
The history of those days of the Second Jewish Temple was of course tumultuous, and rulership of the land of Israel was about to change hands again. During this period, we meet a prominent family of priests from the Zadokite line, known as the Oniads, beginning with Onias I, a contemporary of the Spartan king Arius.
I serve as high priest in our great second temple in Jerusalem, which has now stood for some 2 centuries after it was rebuilt under the auspices of Zerubbabel, the Persian-appointed governor of Judah, and Joshua, the high priest. In those intervening centuries, the Persian Empire was conquered by Alexander the Great, who briefly took our land until his untimely death at 32 years of age. Eventually, Egypt under the Greek Ptolemies took control of the Levant, and we remain today under their authority.
As we know, Alexander conquered all the domains of the Persians, and some of his battles were fought in the land of Israel. The prophet Daniel was said to have described those wars as he foresaw them in his dream.
After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and exceedingly strong, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped the residue with its feet.
The high priest at that time was Simon the Just, who was a direct descendant of the high priest Joshua, the first after the return from the Babylonian captivity. He was the last of the so-called Great Synagogue, an assembly of Jewish scribes, sages, and prophets, which was abolished in his time.
I am the son of Onias, high priest during the time of Alexander the Great. When we Jews heard that Alexander was marching on Jerusalem with a great army, everyone was stricken with fear. But I, together with all the priests and elders, went to greet him. I was dressed in the priestly vestments that I used to wear when going into the Holy of Holies during the service on the Day of Atonement. As soon as Alexander saw me, he descended from his chariot and bowed to me. The commanders of Alexander's troops asked him what happened to make the conqueror of so many lands bow before a Jew, whom he previously threatened to destroy. Alexander answered that every night preceding a victory, he saw an old man in his dream, who resembled me, the Jewish high priest. He therefore refused to do me any harm, and believed that being kind to me would bring him luck in the coming wars.
This incredible account, recorded by Josephus, is doubtless exaggerated and of dubious validity, since if Simon were in fact the son of Onias I, he would not have become high priest until well after Alexander the Great died. But the story does reflect the fact that in those days the Zadokite priesthood, of which Simon was a member, triumphed over the rival Essenes, or as they are also called, the Enochians.
Onias II, son of Simon the Just, later assumed the high priesthood. He was a covetous man and of limited intelligence. For several years he failed to send the annual tribute of 20 talents to Egypt, ruled by Ptolemy III. At last Ptolemy threatened to take military action. The impending disaster was averted by Onias' nephew Joseph, who, having friendly relations with the Egyptian court, managed to conciliate Ptolemy.
It was during those tumultuous days that the Essene movement, which I, at a later date, attempted to lead, came into being. We were an opposition party within the temple elite. There was at first no desire to form a separate, schismatic community, but to purify the temple. Yes, the temple was impure, but we Essenes never questioned its existence, at least not at first.
But who in fact were these Essenes, or, as we might call them, the Enochians? There is much about them that we do not know. Were they genealogically related to the Zadokites, or were they members of rival priestly families? They may well have been from a line of priests who traced their lineage back to Moses himself via a rival of Solomon's high priest, Zadok, whose name was Abiathar. In other words, they claimed to represent an even older priestly line.
That was when some among us distributed a book, which, so we insisted, was originally composed by our patriarch Enoch. It was the catalyst of the schism that divided the Israelite priesthood and gave birth to us Essenes. Some call it the Book of Watchers, part of the larger Book of Enoch. Not surprisingly, many doubt it, and the Zadokite priesthood rejects it. But those who take the time to read and study it know intrinsically that it is divine in its origin. It is a first-hand account of what happened long ago, Enoch being the seventh in line from the first man, Adam. In those days, a group of rebellious angels known as the Watchers looked down upon earthly women, so that they were fair and lusted after them. They descended and cohabited with them, spawning a race of giants. These giants were enormously tall, 300 ells in height, and began consuming human flesh. That is why, in the days of Noah, the waters of the flood were sent to wipe them out. The disobedience of these angels was the true origin of evil.
We would, of course, expect the teacher of righteousness, leader of the sect who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, to proclaim the Book of Watchers to be authentic holy writ. But the Zadokites, whose descendants eventually morphed into the Pharisee party and ultimately the rabbinic sages, so thoroughly suppressed it, along with the entire Book of Enoch, that it only survived in Ethiopic translation, until assorted scraps of the text were found in one of the caves along the western shore of the Dead Sea.
In those days, while the sons of men multiplied, fair and lovely daughters were born to them. The watchers, those sons of heaven, were attracted to them and lusted for them. They said to one another, "Let us seek out the daughters of men and rear sons for ourselves." They, along with their chieftains, took women for themselves. They chose whomever they desired. They penetrated and defiled them. They taught them witchcraft, magic spells, and how to cut roots and herbs for use in their conjurations.
According to the Book of Watchers, it was the rebel angel Amasras who taught incantations and the cutting of roots to humans, while Armaros taught the resolving of incantations. This detail provides a compelling link to what Josephus records regarding the Essenes.
They also take great pains in studying the writings of the ancients, and choose out of them what is most for the advantage of their soul and body, and they inquire after such roots and medicinal stones as may cure their diseases.
Here we have explicit mention of cutting roots for healing purposes and studying ancient writings, which we can speculate included those presumably recorded by Enoch. Is that a coincidence? Or were the Essenes in fact the same group as the authors of the Book of Watchers, who were behind the movement now called Enochic Judaism? One prominent theory now suggests that the Essene movement was much larger and much older than the splinter group who later produced the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were one and the same as the Enochians, the popular alternative to the Zadokites who controlled the temple. As the Second Temple period progressed, we increasingly find not a single Judaism, but two competing Judaisms, and the resulting conflict would eventually have enormous consequences.
We focus on the Torah and on maintaining the boundaries of holiness. Our temple in Jerusalem is a visual representation of the cosmos itself. It is separated from the profane world. We can think of this holiness as a series of concentric circles of greater degrees of sanctification, by which the mountain of Jerusalem is separate and distinct from the mundane material world round about. Looming above all is covenant, our covenant with the divine. We have no patience with those among us, the Essenes, who reverence neither our Torah nor our covenant.
We, by contrast with the Zadokite impostor priests, focus on the ancient writings of Enoch and on the origin of sin and evil deriving from a host of disobedient angels. They chose by their own free agency the pathway of rebellion. They chose to descend, and they chose to corrupt humanity. We still await the end of days and the final judgment, which will not only involve the destiny of the fallen angels, but also of the evil kings of the earth. In the end, we will reign supreme.
Who would come out on top in the end? That's a story we still need to explore. There's so much more to come.